October 29th, 1929, Black Tuesday. The stock market crashed, wiping out billions in wealth overnight. What followed was the worst economic catastrophe in modern history. Unemployment reached 25%. Banks failed by the thousands. Families lost everything. The Great Depression reshaped economies, governments, and societies worldwide. But what if it had never happened? What if the Roaring Twenties had just kept roaring? Today, we're exploring an alternate timeline where the Great Depression never occurred. The Great Depression wasn't caused by a single event. It was a perfect storm of economic disasters. The 1929 stock market crash triggered it, but underlying problems ran deeper. Overproduction in agriculture and industry, wealth inequality, bank failures, poor monetary policy by the Federal Reserve, and international trade breakdowns all contributed. After World War I, the global economy was already fragile. War debts, reparations payments, and disrupted trade patterns created instability. The stock market bubble of the late 1920s, driven by speculation and easy credit, was unsustainable. When confidence collapsed, the entire house of cards came down. But what if smarter economic policies had prevented this catastrophe? What if the Federal Reserve had acted differently? What if banks had been better regulated? Let's explore this fascinating alternate reality. In this timeline, the Federal Reserve recognizes the danger of the overheated stock market in 1928 and takes action. They raise interest rates more aggressively, cooling speculation before it becomes a massive bubble. Some investors lose money, but there's no catastrophic crash because the bubble never inflates to devastating proportions. Banks implement stronger reserve requirements and lending standards throughout the 1920s. This means fewer risky loans and more stability in the financial system. When economic headwinds hit in late 1929, banks weather the storm rather than collapsing by the thousands. International cooperation is stronger. The major economies recognize their interdependence and avoid the protectionist trade wars that devastated global commerce in our timeline. The infamous Smoot-Hawley tariff, which raised American import duties and triggered retaliatory tariffs worldwide, either never passes or is significantly modified. The result is a mild recession in 1929 to 1930, rather than a depression. Unemployment rises to perhaps 8 or 9%. Painful, but nothing like the 25% of our timeline. The economy recovers by 1931, and the 1930s become a decade of continued, though more modest, growth. The political implications are enormous. In our timeline, the Depression destroyed faith in capitalism and democratic governments. Desperate people turned to extremism. In Germany, economic catastrophe paved the way for Hitler's rise. In Italy, Mussolini consolidated power by promising economic recovery. Across the world, democracy retreated as authoritarian movements gained support. In this alternate timeline, without economic desperation, extremism doesn't gain the same traction. The Nazi Party remains a fringe movement in Germany. Hitler might win a few seats in parliament but never becomes chancellor. Without the economic crisis to exploit, his message of national renewal and scapegoating doesn't resonate. The Weimar Republic survives and gradually stabilizes. By the late 1930s, Germany is a functioning democracy with a growing economy. There's no rearmament, no aggressive expansion, no persecution of Jews on a national scale. The Holocaust never happens. World War II, at least as we know it, doesn't occur. In the United States, Franklin Roosevelt probably never becomes president. Herbert Hoover successfully manages the mild recession and wins re-election in 1932. The New Deal never happens because there's no crisis requiring such dramatic government intervention. This means the modern American welfare state develops differently, if at all. Social security, unemployment insurance, banking regulations, and labor protections either don't exist or emerge much more gradually through normal political processes rather than crisis response. Before we dive deeper into this alternate 1930s, if you're finding this fascinating, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We explore mind-bending alternate histories every week. Drop a comment below. Would you want to live in a world without the Great Depression? Let's continue. The 1930s become a continuation of the prosperity and cultural dynamism of the 1920s. Jazz continues evolving. Hollywood's golden age happens on schedule, but with more optimistic films, no Dust Bowl dramas or poverty stories, because those conditions don't exist at the same scale. Art Deco architecture flourishes even more. The Empire State Building and other iconic structures are built on schedule, but they're joined by even more ambitious projects because construction continues booming. Cities grow and modernize throughout the decade. Technology advances steadily. Without economic disruption, research and development continue. Television might be commercialized earlier. Aviation advances more quickly. The automobile industry keeps innovating and expanding. By 1940, technology is several years ahead of our timeline. However, without the pressure of economic crisis, some social reforms happen more slowly. Labor unions grow, but don't gain the same power they achieved through New Deal legislation. Workplace safety, minimum wage laws, and the 40-hour workweek come later or in weaker forms. Income inequality remains high. The 1920s saw enormous wealth concentration at the top, and without the Depression forcing redistribution and reform, this continues. By 1940, the wealthiest 1% control an even larger share of national wealth than in our house. By 1940, the wealthiest 1% control an even larger share of national wealth than in our timeline. World War II either doesn't happen or is dramatically different. Without Hitler's Germany, there's no invasion of Poland in 1939. Japan still pursues expansion in Asia, but without a European war creating opportunities, they're more cautious. The Pacific War might still occur, but later and in different form. The United States doesn't mobilize for total war. This means no massive industrial expansion, no Manhattan Project, no rapid technological advancement driven by military necessity. Atomic weapons might not be developed until the 1950s or later, if at all. The post-war economic boom that created the American middle class in our timeline doesn't happen the same way. That boom was partly fueled by wartime savings, GI Bill benefits, and conversion of military production to consumer goods. Without the war, economic growth is steadier but less dramatic. Fast forward to 2025 in this alternate timeline. The world is wealthier overall. Decades of uninterrupted growth compound. But inequality is more severe. Without the equalizing effects of Depression-era reforms and wartime mobilization, wealth remains concentrated. The welfare state is weaker everywhere. Social security might not exist in America. European social democracies developed partly in response to both the Depression and the need to rebuild after World War II. Without those crises, social protections are less comprehensive. Democracy is stronger in some ways. Without the authoritarian movements that thrived during economic catastrophe, democratic institutions are more robust in many countries. But without the reforms forced by crisis, democracy is also less responsive to ordinary people's needs. Technology is probably somewhat more advanced. 75 years of relatively uninterrupted research and development without the massive destruction of World War II means steady technological progress. However, the breakthrough innovations driven by wartime necessity, radar, jet engines, nuclear power, computers, either arrive later or develop differently. Culture is less diverse in some ways. The cultural mixing that happened during the Depression and World War II, rural people moving to cities, Americans of different backgrounds working together, doesn't occur at the same scale. Regional and class divisions persist more strongly. The environmental situation is mixed. More continuous industrial growth means more pollution and resource depletion. But without World War II's massive environmental damage and the post-war industrial explosion, some ecosystems might be healthier. Interestingly, we might be less prepared for economic crises. The Depression taught hard lessons about financial regulation, monetary policy, and the need for economic safety nets. Without that learning experience, financial systems might be more vulnerable to future shocks. Would this world be better or worse? It's genuinely difficult to say. Millions who suffered through the Depression would have lived better lives. The Holocaust never happens, saving 6 million Jews and millions of others. World War II's 70 million deaths are avoided. But the social reforms that improved working people's lives were forced by crisis. Progressive taxation, labor rights, financial regulation, and social insurance emerged from necessity. Without that necessity, would they exist at all? The Great Depression was a human catastrophe that scarred generations, but it also forced societies to confront inequality and build systems to prevent such disasters. A world without that crisis might be richer, but less just, more stable, but less equal, more peaceful, but less prepared for the challenges ahead. History's greatest tragedies often drive humanity's greatest progress. That's a sobering thought about the world we actually live in. What do you think? Would the world be better without the Great Depression, or did we learn necessary lessons from that suffering? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this alternate economic history, check out our video on what if the 2008 financial crisis was worse. Link in the description.